What is B-roll and overlay? You hear these terms quite a bit in filmmaking, but if you don't know what they mean, it's pretty confusing. So we're going to break it down for you in this episode and also give you some examples of what B-roll and overlay is and how you can use it in your video.
Okay, so we know that you guys work on video projects, and if you've got an upcoming video project and you're working with your video production company, you need to know about this. B-roll and overlay is super important. Ain't that right, Big Guy?
I love B-roll. It brings a video to life, just like voiceovers do.
So the reason it's so important, like you said, was because this is what really brings your video to life.
We use B-roll in just about every single video we could create. If you just think about if you're seeing any video and you start seeing scenery or images that match what the person's talking about, but they're from another place, not necessarily the person who's being interviewed, that's B-roll. And for this video and the purpose of this video, we're going to call it B-roll, but overlay is actually the same thing.
And the reason this is so important for you guys to know is that it needs to end up in your shooting schedule. You cannot forget about this. You need to have time to be able to gather these materials that brings your video to life, and your video production company needs to know that. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a really boring video, and we don't want them, right?
No. We don't want more boring videos.
So you got to know this, you got to know what it is, you got to know how to brief it, and we're going to break it down for you now.
Okay, a few different types of B-roll are photos, stock images, or video. Even iPhone video could be used as overlay.
Archival materials, we call that. So it can be anything that's already in your media library. You need to make that available to your video production company at the highest resolution available. Give them the original files. It's going to work much better. Next, we're going to move on to your establishing shot.
Establishing shots are exactly that. They establish the location that your footage is being filmed at.
They set the scene. They identify the setting. Often drones are a great way to get this material, or a wide angle lens from outside.
And Mike loves getting on the drone, and he takes it pretty much everywhere, and it also generates some incredibly interesting comments from passers-by. So if you've got a drone, we'd actually really love to know what kind of comments you get, because we've gotten some very interesting ones.
But doesn't it lift your production value by so much? Just for the 10 minutes that it takes to put the drone up and get that overview shot, it is gold, and you should be briefing that in if your production company has access to a drone.
So another type of shot you might have is often referred to as a wide shot. And when you're talking about a wide shot, what you're really meaning is the widest possible angle that you can make with the camera lens that you're using.
Take this scene, for example. The wide shot is the shot with both Sue and I in it and the background of our studio, so you get a sense of the space. What's next after the wide?
Then you've got a mid shot. So when you've got your mid shot, it's, you know, much closer in than what you're using for your wide shot, and usually it's probably sort of, you know, torso.
Yep.
This kind of, it's like a weird dance, like an Egyptian.
That's right. And then like the third one in classic coverage is of course the close-up. We're not using the close-up here, but because we're shooting in 4K, maybe TJ can just sort of jump in, do a digital jump to give us a close-up.
And close-ups are really good for much more intimate, if the storytelling requires it. But I actually think you should use close-ups quite sparingly, because if you get too many close-ups, it actually can feel almost a little bit awkward as a viewer. So I think the mid-shot's usually the one that you would use the most.
I love close-ups in our powerful human interest stories, and chucking on the long lens and getting that really shallow, beautiful depth of field, and just sort of seeing into the windows of the soul, looking into the eyes. And yes, use it sparingly, but it is so great to have it. So again, that's 10 minutes of your schedule there, but it can be absolute gold. Here are some examples. So we've talked about wide, we've talked about mids, we've talked about close-ups, then you go to reverse angles. And that's really this setup that we've got here, where we're focusing on Sue looking over my shoulder and then doing the reverse and looking at me over your shoulder. And the reason we use this is it's a really great way to draw the audience in. It's also really good if you've got an interviewer, right?
Oh, it's a really good way to bring the interviewer into the storytelling, but without having to focus on them, but it places them in the scene.
Okay, next up we'll talk about OBDOC. Big guy, what's it stand for?
Mike, OBDOC means observational documentary.
That's it, observational documentary. So this is just filming actuality. So it's a scene, it's the world happening in front of you about the story you're telling and getting lots of coverage of that scene, including wides, mid-shots, close-ups, reverses, and cutaways. So definitely need to make time in your schedule to get OBDOC footage. I also mentioned cutaways.
Cutaway is really just that, when you cut away from the main action to something else which enhances the storytelling for that scene.
That's right, might be an important object, might be someone's hand gestures, close up on their hands, might be on their feet, it might be an object in the room, it might be the view out the window. They're cutaways that just help make your visual storytelling all the more immersive. And then lastly, there's a whole swathe of specialty shots. So specialty shots can be those types of cameras like GoPros and action cams that you stick on people, you know, really small
Gimbals,
cameras.
sliders, all of those different. That's when you're getting into some really quite technical filmmaking there. So if you're just doing a first time video, I think the shots that we've talked about here are probably the most useful for helping you brief in your video production company. And I think
Gimbals are important. I think we should mention that.
Okay.
So, you know, so gimbals are like the modern day equivalent of a Steadicam, but they're a much more accessible rig. And most video production companies will have them now. They just kind of give you that dynamic action flying around the scene. And often you'll shoot them at a higher frame rate, which means that you can slow them down, which gives you another effect. You know, another type of specialty shot might be a time-lapse shot, which is the other way around. Instead of slowing it down, you're speeding it up. So these are things to keep in mind as you're laying out your schedule.
I think the thing I love, just bring it back to the gimbal, I think the thing I really love about the gimbals these days is because they are enabling a huge amount of movement, but they're also very steady, so you don't get that horrible queasy cam. I don't know if you remember a few years ago, there was a real trend in handheld camera, and it was really hard to
Jason Bourne
watch.
movies,
Jason Bourne movies, great example. But the gimbals make it really dynamic, but without that wobbly kind of feeling in it.
Yeah, and then look, lots of video production companies will have all sorts of other toys, as Sue touched on, sliders and different uses for drones and different types of cameras. That's great. Just ask them, what do you got? How do we use that? Is that helpful for the story we're telling? So look, that's it, guys. I think that's a helpful starting point for just starting to think about all the other material you need other than your core interview or presentation that's going to be at the heart of your video. This is everything else that you add on around it.
And the reason that you add all of these bits in and around your video is because it keeps it more dynamic and it keeps it more visually interesting. And the more visually interesting it is, the easier it is for people to watch and engage and be entertained by it, so they're less likely to click away and watch something else. And the key to all of this is you want them to watch your story. So the better you can make your storytelling through, you know, really simple things like different types of camera angles, different types of overlay footage, the better it's going to be for you. So I hope that's helped clarify.
No more boring videos.